What's up, Taiwan? Good morning. I'm Chou with 10 minutes of news from here in Taiwan and around the world. Hong Kong wrapped up its elections on Sunday with only one candidate in the contest. John Lee will be sworn in as the new chief executive on July 1st. Outgoing leader Carrie was in power for the most tumultuous tenure of any chief executive in the city since it transformed from a British colony to a special administrative region of China in 1997. Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick takes a look at her contentious legacy.
Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam will leave Government House for the last time next month, calling curtains on a 5-year term that has turned Hong Kong upside down. When she first assumed the territory's top job in 2017, she was welcomed as a peacemaker. The city's first female leader was seen as someone who could help heal the city after shattered hopes of democracy led to the sustained protests in 2014, known as the Umbrella Movement. But the simmering tensions didn't cool off under her reign. They exploded. It all began in mid-2019 when Lam proposed a bill that would allow criminal suspects to be extradited to Communist Party-run courts in mainland China.
Carrie Lam pushed this legislation through LegCo in spite of massive protests and also in spite of opposition, very considerable opposition, from the traditional supporters of the government.
As this opposition mounted, Lam only became more determined to pass the bill. In June 2019, 2 million people, about a quarter of Hong Kong's population, took to the streets against the extradition bill. Activists say Carrie Lam responded by pushing harder to pass the bill, in turn pushing citizens to the brink.
They decided to close down all the political avenues for the pro-democracy camp to be involved in the system, be involved in daily politics, and then to basically silence us. At that moment, a lot of people, not only for us, but for more moderate Democrats, they were feeling that the room for positive negotiation, a positive interchange with the Beijing government was dwindling. And up to a point when the 2019 protests took place, we all realized that the room is basically minimized, that there's no meaningful interaction anymore. And Hong Kong people were so angry about it and they started to resist.
Lam eventually backed down, and in July 2019, she announced the extradition bill was dead. But it was too late. It had ignited the undercurrent of discontent with Hong Kong's government and Beijing's tightening grip.
I personally have to shoulder much of the responsibility.
Demonstrations turned violent as protesters began targeting property associated with the government, and Lam's administration leaned on the police to resolve tensions by force. The government insisted that a silent majority of Hong Kongers supported them, but elections in November that year saw pro-democracy candidates take over 90% of local councils. It was the biggest landslide in Hong Kong's electoral history.
If you look at the track record of Chinese Communist Party at selecting our leaders, it has not been particularly good. So we had a tycoon, Mr. Tong, who left in the middle of his second term, and then we had an administrative officer, Donald Zhang, who ended up going to jail for misconduct in public office. Then we had someone with another business background, C.Y. Leung, a professional with strong links to the party in Hong Kong, who left after one term and left the city very badly divided. And then, of course, we have Carrie Lam.
The protest was subdued by the onset of the pandemic in early 2020, but anger and tensions simmered, and support for Hong Kong's pro-democracy camp was unabated. And as dissent grew louder and demonstrators threatened to take to the streets again, the crisis would be extinguished only by a strict new law, direct from Beijing. In her last 2 years in office, hundreds of political prisoners have been jailed under this national security law, once a promised land for those fleeing persecution. Lam has presided as Hong Kong transformed from one of the world's freest cities to one where critics are persecuted and dissent is silenced. In the quarter of a century since Hong Kong was returned to Chinese rule, its chief executives have been remembered less for their accomplishments than for the political crises they weathered. Having overseen the city's most widespread upheaval, its harshest political crackdown, and a global pandemic in which Hong Kong's death rate topped the world, Lam's time at the helm looks set to go down as the most unforgettable yet. Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick for TaiwanPlus.
On the topic of elected office, the people of the Philippines decide their next president on Monday, with the namesake son of former dictator Ferdinand Marcos leading the polls. The vote could have profound influence on Manila's foreign policy. The country's relations with China is a key point of contention. Our reporter James Chater has more.
When firebrand Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte swept to power in 2016, he promised an overhaul of the country's foreign policy. For Duterte, that meant shaking off its former colonizer and long-time military ally in Washington and shaking hands with Beijing, despite a China-skeptic Philippine public.
The way he sold it to the broader public, who is pro-American and anti-China, was twofold. One, this would be a better way to secure Philippine interests in the South China Sea, and two, China would give him a lot of money for it, and neither of those things happened.
6 years on, China has surpassed Japan as the Philippines' biggest trading partner and is by far Manila's largest source of imported goods. But rosy economic figures belie Filipinos' simmering frustration toward China. Billion-dollar infrastructure projects promised by Beijing when Duterte came into power haven't materialized, and an influx of Chinese business people have priced locals out of the property market.
The Philippines didn't really get much from China in terms of the concessions that the administration is expecting, especially given that the Philippines took a position that ultimately, I would say, sacrificed its national interest.
All that poses a problem for the man currently bidding to be Duterte's successor, the namesake son of the former dictator, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Duterte's party has backed Marcos Jr. in the upcoming election. His daughter Sara is Marcos's running mate for vice president. And that association has left some fearful Marcos too will be soft on China.
I think Marcos would even double down on establishing partnerships with China, at least at the economic realm, and would try to shelve the West Philippine Sea dispute as much as they can. Again, at the expense of what the Philippines won in 2016.
2016 was a watershed moment for the two sides. That year, The Hague rules China's claim to waters within this so-called 9-dash line had no legal basis. Beijing lays claim to 2/3 of the South China Sea, through which 60% of global maritime trade passes. Filipinos now call this the West Philippine Sea. China rejected The Hague's decision, and since then, so-called Chinese maritime militia have hounded Philippine fishing boats in disputed waters. Anti-China protests are held on the anniversary of The Hague's ruling.
Dapat gawa ng aksyon na para implement yung ating pagkapanalo o mapatupad yung pagkapanalo natin sa arbitral tribunal.
Analysts say Beijing's intransigence on the issue has deeply damaged its reputation.
The fact that China seems incapable of changing its behavior or unwilling or uninterested in changing its behavior, I think suggests to many Filipinos that China doesn't take the Philippines seriously, doesn't treat the Philippines as a co-equal state in the international system.
With just days till the election, Marcos Jr. is polling far ahead. That's despite strong grassroots support for leader of the opposition and current Vice President Leni Robredo, a human rights lawyer who's seen as having a tougher stance on China.
She was very firm and clear in asserting what has been achieved or won in the 2016 PCA ruling. And she is very firm in upholding that particular document when it comes to jumpstarting any type of conversation when it comes to our territories in the West Philippine Sea.
Regardless of the candidate's position on maritime disputes with China, the winner of the May 9th election will need to balance between the country's largest trading partner in Beijing and traditional security ally in Washington, a dilemma increasingly faced by leaders across the region. Alex Chen and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching What's Up Taiwan. Remember to download the TaiwanPlus app for more stories from here in Taiwan and around the world. Finally, today we'll leave you with images of a two-toed sloth named Fernando celebrating his 6th birthday at the Phoenix Zoo. I've been Joey Chow. Have a great day, and I'll catch you on the flip side.